Member for Merriman-Côte-Tentramar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday I spoke about the calls that the Black Lives Matter community in New Brunswick are making on the provincial government. And so one of them is that they're calling on the government of New Brunswick to incorporate content on the history of slavery, segregation, and systemic oppression in New Brunswick and Canada into the public school curriculum. They're calling on the government of New Brunswick to commission independent research on the personal, social, and economic impacts of racism in New Brunswick and develop an action plan to remedy these issues through an anti-racist strategy. And they are also calling on the government of New Brunswick and municipal governments to implement mandatory cultural competency and anti-racism training for police and government officials. My question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier is if the Premier will commit to implementing these calls from the Black Lives Matter community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
So, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to recognize what the calls are asking for and to get into details of what's required, because we know something's required, Mr. Speaker. I don't think this is a place for me just to say absolutely, but my point is I agree. We have to find a way to follow recommendations. We have to find a way to implement recommendations. That's what the whole First Nations discussion was about this morning, Mr. Speaker. And to the Minister's point earlier about, 797 recommendations over the past 24 years, and less than 15% implemented, partially implemented, or maybe not even that many. So, Mr. Speaker, we can talk, and it's an easy thing to do for government just to say, well, we'll call for a commissioner and a public inquiry and a new commission. Or, Mr. Speaker, we can actually deal with issues that are already on the table that need to be done, that are reflective of the concerns here in New Brunswick. Mr. Speaker, we chose the latter as the first step in towards subsequent meetings because it was only the first meeting. So in this case, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to learn more about these recommendations, and I'd like to understand what the next step should be. So let's just not talk, Mr. Speaker.